Welcome to episode 2 of Beginner's Guide to Mixing Metal at Home with me, James MSV. This episode we're going to be discussing the bass. Now I'm going to talk a bit about the theory behind what I'm doing before getting down to the inserts that I use. So if you'd like to skip that, please have a look at the navigation buttons down the left hand side of the screen. Click one of those to just move straight on to the actual mixing part. But first of all, as I said, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes going over the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing. Hopefully that will give you a better understanding as well of how to approach your own bass sound. The bass is quite a tricky one in heavy metal. As an instrument, it can be one of the harder ones to get your head around when you're starting because it requires a bit more care with EQ than some of the other instruments. By its nature, it's a low-end instrument, obviously. Those frequencies can often be what's described as muddy, where they sound a bit woolly maybe and obscure other sounds that you want to come through in the mix. It can also contain some nasty buzzing or flapping type frequencies. Generally one of the harder instruments to work with. The main problem in heavy metal is that it can compete with your low-end kick sound, and really the juggling act is making sure the bass is complementing the guitars properly, rounding off their lower end, but at the same time not obscuring the low toms and the kick of the drums. It can be quite difficult to juggle that to make sure you're getting your proper boom of both the kick and the proper boom of the bass where they should be without interfering with each other. Got a quick example here on a frequency analyzer. This purple line is showing the bass signal that I've got coming in on this yellow track here. The bass has been processed through an amp simulator, so it does sound like a natural bass now, and I have cut off a lot of low end, as you can see. It's pretty obvious, as you can see from this analyzer, you do not need some of these higher ends. You may want some of that sound, and if you want, you've got to experiment with your own bass sound. For me, it wasn't necessary. I've stripped out everything beyond 1000k. You'll see, surprisingly, it doesn't sound too stripped out. It still has a nice treble end to it. I've got here around the 125 mark is where my bass peaks. I've EQ'd this on the amp simulator before bouncing down this track. I didn't show you that because I'll be covering that in a whole nother episode, how to use plugins of that nature. This is more about the mixing stage. And this signal, as you can see, I've tried to peak at around the 100 to 125 mark, which can be a good place for your bass to peak, especially as my kick is peaking around the 60 to 80 mark. So where this bass starts to drop off here is exactly where the kick will sit. That's a deliberate hole I've created there. So I've stripped out everything past 1000, so we've got a lump here of frequencies where you can see it's fairly obvious that the bass is active. You'll notice as it drops off around the 500 mark it rises again. That is again a deliberate EQ setting. You will find a bass like the kick has a low end and a high end. You have to find where the good low end is on your particular bass and where the good high end is, and by mixing them you will get the sound you're after. I found my good low end, and I also wanted a bit of high end sort of slap. I am not into the sort of funky type sounds, maybe Faith No More, Red Hot Chili Peppers. That isn't what I'm after, but you still need some high end to help it shine through a bit, and I found it on this bass at around that mark, which is around the 600 mark, but that will vary depending on what style of metal you are mixing and how you want the bass to sound and what bass you are using. First of all, as I explained, I have bounced down my bass signal through an amp simulator so that it sounds like a live bass. I'll just give you an example here now. That doesn't actually sound too bad as it is, but what you would find once it was in the mix with guitars and drums is that it's maybe a bit weak. So just like with the snare in the drum episode, I have created a duplicate track. This is again a common trick to use to double up on the bass. Process this second track and then put them both through a group for final EQ and compression. This first track of bass that you've just heard is one that I spent some time with an amp simulator creating the EQ and the tone I wanted for the bass. So now that it's bounced down, I don't need to do anything else to it. It's EQ'd for pretty much how I want it, and the levels are all pretty good as far as I'm concerned. I've copied it over exactly the same track now onto a second track, and I've got one plugin on there which I will now open up. This is, you'll be glad to hear, another free plugin by Reaper. If you are not sure of Reaper, you see their web address here, www.reaper.fm. They specialise in sort of more budget kit. They do a DAW called Reaper, and it's around $60, I believe, for a home license. I've not used it myself, but at that sort of price, I can't help but think, unless you are on a tight budget, you might want to try moving onto something a bit more well-known. However, they do have some nifty little tricks, and one of them they've given away for free, which is a pack of plugins which I use entirely on the bass, one of which, the Rear JS. Now, this is a series. If I just show you these menus here, you've got amp models for guitars, you've got wave shapers for distortion, you can specify which frequencies to distort, pretty detailed stuff, loop samplers, all different filters. It goes on and on, different types of meters, dynamic meters, VU meters, noise gates, reverbs. It's for free. I mean, this isn't something I've hacked or been given by a friend. This is available free on their website. It's really good to mess around with. I won't go into it any further than that, other than there's a whole lot of customization you can do with this. One of their plugins is a bass manager, which is a brilliant little thing. It's a specific bass distortion program. You can choose which frequency to distort, you can choose how much to boost it by, clear some of the muddiness, I think, this muffle. Also, what's important with the bass is a high pass filter. You will notice on this frequency analyzer we have some frequencies below the 30 to 60 mark. There's sort of scientific debate as to what is the lowest frequency a human can hear. A lot of people with good hearing can probably start to notice bass between the 16 to 30 hertz range. People with not so good hearing, maybe not, maybe 60 to 80 hertz. It isn't uncommon if you put a commercial CD into your computer and have a look at the frequency analyzer there. It will not be unusual to see that they've completely shelved this off at around the 30 to 60 mark, that there's virtually no energy below that. That's so that they can free up the space in the higher end and make the whole CD louder. I try and emulate that as best as possible at home, but there are many reasons why it isn't entirely possible. However, I do like to try and get rid of some of this redundant energy down here that we're not really going to hear anyway. I've got the high pass set quite high at 70 hertz. It does roll off, but bearing in mind this is a second track as well, this isn't affecting the first track, so there is still that low end on the first track. I'm just not doubling up on that very low end there. If we listen to this solo as a distorted track, you can hear I've sacrificed some of the low end to give a bit more high end on the bass distortion. The reason for that is fairly obvious. I'm playing both these tracks together. I've got my clean bass sound and I'm adding in a distorted sound at about half the volume of the clean sound. With metal, you may choose you want to have a clean bass sound. I am finding though, especially with tuned down guitars, anything from D and below, if you distort your bass a bit as well, it tends to meld better with the guitars. A good trick then is using these dual tracks. You can decide how much distortion in any given part. If there are quiet solos, quiet bridges, what have you, or anything where you need to strip the distortion back, you can just automate the volume on that channel to lower it a bit and alter the amount of distortion going through the bass signal at any time. So let's play these together. We've got the clean bass there, and then add it in, take it back off for you there, and add it back in to show you. It's quite a nice rounded sound, and the distortion isn't too intrusive or making the sound too muddy. Once I'm happy with that, then, as I say, I have grouped both of these yellow bass tracks into this orange bass group, where I am now going to process them as one single signal. Finally, you can see this orange line is where the distortion has brought in some new frequencies there. I will clear that now and play this for 1 second to get the bass signal coming through. You can see nicely there where I've got my peak at around the 100 mark. I've drifted it off so that it's completely gone by 4,000. There's no energy taken up for vocals, the hi-ends of the drums or the guitars. There's a nice space there for the rest of the music. I want to pull off some of this low end. I use another Reaper insert for that. This is Reaper standalone EQ. It's very versatile. You can create as many hit points as you want. You can see a wonderful part of this tool is that it's showing the bright yellow is the process signal that I've created. The dark yellow is the original signal, and you can see below about 50 Hz I've managed to pull out all that redundant energy we're not really hearing. All of the characteristics of the bass are appearing around here, which I've kept fairly level. Pulled down a bit where the kick drum is occurring to make sure there's space for that. Pulled down a bit at around the 400 mark because I identified some nasty frequency there I didn't want. Slight boost between 500 and 1k to give me the bit of high end, which is nice, and then completely pulling it off as we get further along the spectrum. And finally, as with most other things, a compressor. Now I've brought one up here to show you what settings you would use on a compressor. I must say though, I don't tend to use bass compression. By the time I've got it to this stage, it tends to be where I want it signal wise. The levels are good. It's been through enough processing with the amp simulator on the original track, then the distortion on the second track and balancing the volumes there, then through a final EQ. So by the time it's gone through that final EQ on the group, I'm happy with that signal and it tends to be working for me on the track. If you do feel you do want to compress it though, this is a fairly standard sort of setting for your bass. Around a 5:1 ratio. Your threshold may vary. I've got mine set just above 20 there, minus 20. That's quite a subtle effect. I'm gonna play this again for you. There's my clean signal as it were, and there's the signal with the compressor. I just find that the compressor takes a bit of life out of it. You may have a better compressor that doesn't do that. This is one of the drawbacks to using stock plugins. You may sometimes find that they're not quite as good as more expensive ones, but when you've paid 400 quid, 500 quid for Cubase and you may not have the money for a better compressor, there are sometimes when you look at them and think, actually I don't need to use it, it's better without, and this is one of those cases I think, so I turn that off and don't use it. The Reaper plugins I would highly recommend getting your hands on. As I say, Reaper.fm is their website, and thank you very much for listening. If you have any comments, as I said, the bass is a fairly hard one to balance correctly, so I would be interested to hear any comments that you may have, or if you think I've done anything incorrect. I'm always glad to pick up new skills or learn from other people as well. Please come back for episode 3 where I'll be covering the guitars. It will be a mammoth episode, that one. There is a lot to get through. Thank you very much. Goodbye.